You don't hate your job, you hate your boss. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself those were the same thing. They're not. I'm going to walk you through 9 signs that your manager is toxic, not just difficult, not just demanding, but actually toxic. And by the time we get to sign 9, I'm going to show you the one thing most people do that accidentally makes a toxic manager more powerful. Most people never figure that out. Stay with me because it changes everything about how you respond. But here's what nobody tells you first. Toxic managers don't look toxic on the surface. They get promoted, they give decent performance reviews, they say the right things in all hands meetings. And while you're sitting at your desk wondering why you feel anxious, exhausted, and small, they're getting credit for your work. There are 9 specific signs, and if your boss is doing even 3 of them, your career is being quietly damaged right now. Let's get into it. Here's what you've been told to do when your manager is difficult. Work harder, be more patient, try to understand their perspective, document everything, go to HR. That advice isn't wrong, it's just missing something critical. It assumes you know what you're actually dealing with. And most people don't. Because there's a difference between a manager who's demanding and a manager who's toxic. Demanding managers push hard. Toxic managers tear down. Demanding managers have high standards. Toxic managers have agendas. And the reason this matters is because the strategies are completely different. What works with a demanding manager will make things worse with a toxic one. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll keep trying harder at the exact thing that's keeping you stuck. So before you do anything else, you need to know which one you're dealing with. Sign 1. They take credit for your wins and hand you the blame for their failures. Watch the pattern closely. When a project succeeds, they present it. Their name is on it. They accept the praise in the meeting you weren't invited to. When something goes wrong, suddenly you're in the room. Suddenly it's your execution. Suddenly they were skeptical from the start. This isn't accidental. It's systematic. And it's one of the clearest signs that your manager sees you as a resource to extract from, not a person to develop. Here's what makes this trap dangerous. The people above your manager only see the credit. They don't see what it cost you. So your manager looks like a high performer, and you look like someone who needs managing. The dynamic runs completely backwards from what it should be. Sign 2. The expectations change after you meet them. You hit the target, then the target moves. You deliver exactly what was asked. Then suddenly it wasn't enough, or it wasn't what they meant, or the priorities shifted. And you're left wondering if you misunderstood. So you work harder next time, you over-deliver, you ask more, questions up front to make sure you're aligned. It still isn't enough, because the goalpost isn't moving by accident. Moving goalposts keeps you in a constant state of proving yourself. It keeps you trying, it keeps you focused on performance instead of on the bigger picture, which is that no matter what you produce, you're not going to win this game. That's not a performance issue, that's a power structure. Sign 3. They correct you, dismiss you, or talk over you in front of other people. A small comment in a meeting, a sigh when you speak, a that's not quite right with no follow-up, an eye roll they didn't bother to hide, and you smile through it. Because what else do you do? Here's what those small moments actually do. Over time, they erode how your colleagues see you. They signal to the room that your contributions are questionable, that your judgment is suspect, that you need to be managed. And here's the part that breaks people. You start doing it to yourself. You start second-guessing before you speak. You get quieter in meetings, you stop raising ideas, because somewhere along the way you internalize their signal. That's not your personality. That's the result of sustained public undermining. And it didn't happen overnight. Sign 4. You're always the last to know. Decisions get made without you. Context gets shared in rooms you're not in. You find out about changes from a coworker, not from your manager. You walk into situations underprepared because the information that would have helped you wasn't passed down. Information is power, and a toxic manager controls it intentionally. When you don't have the full picture, you make decisions that look bad, you miss things you would have caught, you look disorganized or unaware or behind. And who does that benefit? The person who had the information all along. This one is easy to dismiss as disorganization. It isn't. Watch whether the withholding is selective. Watch who does get the information. That's your answer. Let me tell you about a woman named Keisha. Keisha was a project manager at a mid-sized company. By every measurable standard, she was excellent. Her projects came in on time. Her team liked her. Her client satisfaction scores were consistently high. Her manager, David, was charming, well-liked by leadership, always had an answer. Over 18 months, Keisha noticed something. She was being left off email threads. Her ideas in meetings were repeated by David minutes later as his own. When she raised concerns about a project timeline, she was told she was being negative. When the timeline slipped, exactly as she predicted, David told leadership that the team had underestimated the scope. Keisha started to believe she was the problem. She worked harder. She communicated more. She shrunk herself to avoid triggering his reaction. She got a performance review that said she needed to work on her confidence. She left 6 months later, landed a senior role at a competitor, thriving. The problem was never Keisha's confidence. The problem was that she had a manager who needed her to doubt herself to maintain control. That's not a personality conflict, that's a pattern. And it has a name, sign 5. They have a favorite. And it isn't about performance. Every team has dynamics. But a toxic manager uses favoritism as a tool. The favorite gets flexibility, information, credit, access. Everyone else gets managed at arm's length. And the favorite isn't always the best performer. They're the most loyal, the most compliant, the one least likely to push back. Here's what this does to a team. It creates competition for approval instead of collaboration toward results. It makes your performance feel irrelevant because the rules of advancement aren't actually tied to output, they're tied to relationship. And when you can't figure out how to get ahead, no matter how hard you work, that confusion is by design. A team that's competing for one person's approval is a team that's too distracted to notice what's actually happening. Sign 6, everything is a crisis. All the time. Every request is urgent. Every deadline is yesterday. Every problem needs your immediate attention, and if it doesn't get it, there are consequences. And you run. You skip lunch. You answer emails at 10 at night. You cancel plans because something came up again. Here's what constant manufactured urgency actually does. It keeps you reactive. When you're always in emergency mode, you never have time to think strategically. You never look up long enough to evaluate your situation. You're too busy surviving the week to notice you've been surviving the same week for 2 years. Urgency is also a control mechanism. It's very hard to ask questions, push back, or plan your exit when the building is always on fire. Most of those fires, your manager lit them. Sign 7, they make you question what you know to be true. You remember the conversation? They say it didn't happen. You have the email. They say you misread it. You raise a concern. They tell you you're too sensitive, too emotional, too negative. This is gaslighting, and it is the most damaging sign on this list. Not because of what it does to your job, but because of what it does to your judgment. When someone in a position of authority consistently contradicts your lived experience, you start to distrust yourself. You stop trusting your own memory. You second-guess your instincts. You become easier to manage because you've lost confidence in your own perception. That's not a side effect. That's the goal. If you leave every conversation with your manager feeling confused about what just happened, that confusion is information. Trust it. Sign 8. They stand between you and every opportunity to grow. You ask about a stretch project. They say you're not ready. You express interest in a different role. They tell you the timing isn't right. You try to build relationships with other leaders. They find ways to insert themselves or quietly redirect your access. A manager who blocks your growth isn't protecting the team. They're protecting their position. Because if you develop skills they don't have, if you build relationships they don't control, if you become visible to people above them, you become harder to manage. And a toxic manager's primary concern isn't your output, it's their control. Growth means independence, and independence is the one thing they cannot afford to give you. Sign 9. And this is the one most people overlook. You feel it physically, the Sunday dread, the chest tightness before a one-on-one, the relief when they're out of the office, the way you scan their mood the second you walk in, before you even say good morning. Your nervous system is tracking something your rational mind keeps explaining away. You tell yourself it's just stress. Everyone has work stress. But not everyone's hands shake before a check-in. Not everyone spends Sunday nights mentally rehearsing conversations. Not everyone feels lighter the week their manager is on vacation. That physical response is data, and it's often the most honest signal you have. When your body is in a constant low-grade threat response at work, that's not a character flaw. That's a survival response to an unsafe environment, and no promotion, no raise, no loyalty to a company is worth what that does to you over time. Now, I told you at the beginning there was one thing most people do that accidentally makes a toxic manager more powerful. Here it is. They try to fix it. They have the conversation. They adjust their behavior. They work harder. They become more accommodating. They shrink. They over-explain. They document obsessively. They go to HR prematurely. They pour energy into managing the relationship, and every single one of those responses sends the same signal. I am still trying to make this work. I am still available to be managed. I am not going anywhere. That signal is oxygen to a toxic manager. It confirms that control is working. It tells them the tactics are effective. And it extends the timeline, sometimes by years. The move that actually changes the dynamic isn't fixing the relationship. It's deciding, quietly, strategically, without announcing it, that you are done being available for this. Not a confrontation, not a complaint, a decision. You start protecting your energy. You stop seeking approval. You build visibility elsewhere. You create options outside this manager's reach. You make yourself harder to control, not by fighting, but by no longer needing anything from them. That shift in posture is the only thing that actually works, because it removes the leverage they've been using the whole time. Here's the thing about toxic managers nobody wants to say out loud. They don't get there by accident. They get promoted because the behaviors that make them toxic often look like results from above. They're aggressive. That reads as driven. They hoard information. That reads as strategic. They take credit. That reads as leadership. The system doesn't always filter them out. Sometimes the system promotes them, which means the responsibility for recognizing what's happening, right, and protecting yourself, falls on you. Not because it's fair. It isn't. But because waiting for the organization to fix it is often how people lose years they can't get back. If your manager takes your credit and hands you their blame, that's a sign. If the expectations keep moving no matter what you deliver, that's a sign. If they undermine you in public and wonder why you've gone quiet, that's a sign. If you're always the last to know, that's a sign. If the favorites are chosen by loyalty and not performance, that's a sign. If everything is always urgent and you're always exhausted, that's a sign. If you leave every conversation doubting what you know, that's a sign. If every door to growth gets quietly closed, that's a sign. And if your body dreads Monday before Sunday is even over, that is the loudest sign of all. 3 or more of these, and you're not in a bad season. You're in a bad situation. And the first step out of it isn't a conversation with HR. It isn't working harder. It isn't trying to figure out what you did wrong. It's making the decision they're counting on you never to make. You already know something is wrong. You came here because you already know. Trust that.